Hey guys, welcome back to another great game of CEDH. So, for the past week, I've been hearing all about this insane new mono-red commander that has caused quite a stir, as it placed top 16 in Silicon Dynasty. And I won't spoil too much of this, but the commander definitely had a big impact on board. It created almost a sub-game on how much you had to deal with this commander. Also, have you heard the news? Your favorite CEDH YouTube channel has released some cool merch. And if you're interested in picking up some sweet new apparel, come check us out. Also, if you like what you see, consider joining our Patreon, as with your help, we can keep producing the videos you enjoy. And if you want to play with us, hop on our Discord. We have an ever-growing community that loves to talk MTG, or whatever else strikes our fancy. And we would love to meet new people. Alright, block there, kill that. Oh, that is trample. Guess I'm just dead on board. Hey guys, before I get into the deck intros, I wanted to try something special for today's video. And it's actually a special guest. Say hello, Amanda.
Hello, Amanda.
And today she'll be helping me out with the voiceover. So show her some love in the comments. And with that, I'll hand the mic over.
Starting us off is Ken, who brought Tymna Kraum, otherwise known as Blue Farm. This list focuses on quickly assembling win cons, with one-card enablers such as Ad Nauseam or Intuition. The deck puts a heavy emphasis on Ad Nauseam, Underworld's Breach, and Dockside Extortionist Flickers. It utilizes a lot of fast mana to power out either explosive winds or strong early card advantage engines, such as Crom or Rhystic Study. It usually seeks to be the fastest deck at the table, but it has the potential to grind when needed. Next up is Hidden Planet X on the aforementioned Slicer. This is a mono-red Voltron stax list. I never thought I would say this, but this is actually a CEDH Voltron commander. The goal of this deck is for an early Slicer, since you can cast his backside for cheap. This lets you get an early hit in and really start the pain. It uses a combination of stax pieces to slow your opponents down and an equipment package to give you some needed card advantage. As with Slicer, even if your opponent controls it, you control the equipment. So that handy Sword of Fire and Ice will deal 4 damage, and you draw 2 cards. Since Slicer can now attack 4 times each go-around, the game will definitely end quickly if no one has an answer. In the third spot, we have Anthony on Tymna Dargo. This is a Mardu Pirate Farm. It's a combo stax list that aims to slow his opponents down with his creature stax pieces. While using Tymna to keep card advantage, he controls the board and looks to assemble a few different combos with his other commander, Dargo. And bringing up the rear, we have a new player to the channel, Air, who has brought the folk hero, Volo. This Azorius version of Volo is a flash creature control list. Aiming for an early Volo in his handy-dandy journal, this lets you start recording your stax creatures. And with a full journal, Volo will start drawing you an insane amount of cards. I was certainly impressed when Volo started drawing 5+ cards a turn. But without further ado, let's get into the gameplay. Also, Anthony did mulligan down to 5 this game. Ken starts off the game with a Flooded Strand. Hidden has a very spicy Mishra's Workshop as land, which he taps to cast a Grafdigger's Cage and a Thorn of Amethyst. Anthony has a Flooded Strand and passes. Air, unfortunately, was hoping to cast some free spells, but instead played a tap Saprazan Scary. With Ken at their end step cracking his fetch, Anthony responds to this by cracking his own fetch, but doesn't have anything further. He finds a plateau while Ken grabs out a volcanic island. Ken plays another fetch as land for turn, this one being a Bloodstained Mire. Hidden untaps and plays a mountain. This lets him cast his commander Slicer high-speed antagonist, even through the Thorn. The vehicle has Living Metal, which makes him a creature on Hidden's turn. He also has haste, so Hidden turns him sideways at Air, who takes the hit. During Anthony's upkeep, Hidden triggers Slicer to give control of the hired muscle over to Anthony. Anthony draws for turn and plays a Vault of Champions. Slicer is goaded, so Anthony has to attack and send Slicer at Ken for 6.
This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing.
Yep.
Air untaps and gains Slicer. They tap their Scary for 2 blue and use one of it to cast a Mana Crypt, with the other being used to cast a Chrome Mox. And oh boy, was Hidden happy when he had the turn 1 Thorn. but Air continues as they imprint a swan song and then tap the crypt for 2 to cast a soul ring, finally tapping out to cast their commander, Volo, Itinerant Scholar, who on ETB creates a legendary Volo's Journal. Air then ends their turn sending Slicer at Anthony for 6, with Ken cracking his other fetch at end step for an underground sea. Ken untaps and gets Slicer.
Yeah, so that's up to Hidden.
Yeah, so I get to choose. So yeah, you definitely get the Slicer. Everyone gets Slicer. He's hired muscle. He gets around.
Ken plays a scrub land and taps out to cast his commander, Tymna. He then heads to combat and sends Slicer at Anthony. And for that act of aggression, Anthony fires back with a lightning bolt on the Tymna. Although everyone thought he had a swords for the Slicer, and Anthony takes the hit from Slicer. Hidden gets his Slicer back and plays a command beacon as land. He heads to combat and sends Slicer at Anthony, who already has 12 points of Slicer damage on him. This really starts to put pressure on him, as this now puts him at 18 Slicer. Hidden then on his second main casts a static orb. Anthony gets Slicer and plays a battlefield forge. Anthony sends Slicer at Ken, who takes the hit.
I'm very glad Slicer can't be sacrificed.
Air untaps 2 permanents and gets Slicer, and rolls for crypt. They take 3 from their crypt and finally go to their draw.
And then I will go to my draw step. That was too many things before draw.
They move to combat and send Slicer at Ken, as that would have been lethal at Anthony. Ken untaps 2 lands and gets Slicer. He pays 2 for a very cost-effective mana vault and sends Slicer at Air. Hidden plays a Blink Mothwell as land and heads to combat. Slicer heads at Ken, who gets taken out due to commander damage, with Hidden ending his turn after that. Anthony gets Slicer, then plays and cracks a Bloodstained Mire for a Badlands. He wants to pass the turn but has to send Slicer at Air, who now has 15 commander. Air untaps, is safe from crypt, and gains control of Slicer. They cast an Apeto Alchemist and notes down Wizard in the journal. They activate Volo to draw 1 and then head to combat, sending Slicer at Anthony. Although luckily for him, Anthony has response, as he abrades the Slicer, saving himself from dying. Hidden untaps and recasts Slicer on his backside. Hidden is worried that Anthony has more removal in hand and sends Slicer his way. Although looking back, he probably should have attacked Air, as that would have gotten another Slicer attack on Anthony's turn. But what's done is done, and Hidden ships to turn over. Air untaps 2 things and is safe from their crypt. Funnily enough, Hidden doesn't want to convert Slicer back and actually gives him to Air. Hidden's not worried, as he is still at 40 and he can take a hit or 2 off Slicer. Air plays an island as land and taps their Scary and a mana crypt for a Gilded Drake. They name Drake in their journal, and yes, they know the Drake will sacrifice itself since it can't switch with anything. But Air is in trouble and wants to draw 2 off Volo. Slicer then heads at Hidden, who takes the hit. Hidden untaps Slicer and a land. He plays another mountain as land and sends Slicer at Air, who chumps with their Alchemist. Air does use the Alchemist to untap their Soul Ring before damage happens, but Hidden is done after that. Air untaps, gets Slicer back, and is still safe from their crypt. They pay 1 for a Lotus Petal, which is needed for a white mana to cast a Deep Gnome Terramancer. They then send Slicer back at Hidden, and at their second main, tap Volo to draw another 2 cards. Unfortunately, we didn't catch this at the time, but it should have been 3 since the gnome was not noted down. They then play a Sea of Clouds as land and end their turn with a Siren Storm Tamer, naming Pirate in their journal. Hidden untaps and heads to combat. He sends Slicer at Air, who chumps with the gnome. We then fix the issue of Volo, not remembering he met a gnome. With Hidden originally casting a Torpor Orb, he quickly decides not to, and instead just leaves his mana open. Air untaps and Hidden decides to not give Slicer away. Air is safe from their crypt and then taps Volo to draw 4.
4 cards. Is that fine?
Yep, I mean, I don't like it, but I can't stop it.
They play a Cephalid Coliseum as land, and Hidden at his end step, activating his Blink Mothwell to tap his Static Orb. Now his Static Orb is tapped. Hidden actually gets to untap everything. He doesn't draw anything amazing and heads to combat, sending Slicer at Air. Air does debate whether or not Hidden is holding up a pump spell, and decides to not risk it as they chump with their Storm Tamer. Hidden on his second main finally casts his Torpor Orb, and at his end step, Air flashes in a Containment Priest, naming Cleric as its cast. Air untaps, takes 3 from their crypt, and doesn't get Slicer back. They're looking for something, and taps their commander to draw 5, but having nothing else, Hidden taps his Static Orb at end step, and Air has to discard down due to hand size. Hidden is starting to feel worried as Air has started drawing a lot of cards. He sends Slicer back at Air, who chumps it once again. On his second main, Hidden casts a Mask of Memories.
Not untapping very many sucks.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not hating it. I also didn't think this game was gonna go on for this much longer.
Air takes 3 from their crypt and plays a Plains as land and casts a Draenith Magistrate. Hidden untaps and uses his workshop to help cast a Hammer of Nizam, although Hidden should have had to spend 1 extra mana due to the Thorn. But with the ETB auto-equipped on the stack, Air evokes a Solitude, exiling a Grand Abolisher. They name Incantation in their journal, and unfortunately, Air forgot about the Torpor Orb. The Solitude enters and is sacked due to Evoke. With Hidden speeding to combat after that, Slicer turns sideways and the Draenith Magistrate is sacrificed for the greater good. Air untaps and takes 3 from their crypt. Air is digging for answers and taps Volo to draw 6. They play an Urza's Saga as land and taps to cast a Walking Atlas, with Hidden at end step tapping his Static Orb. Hidden untaps and casts and end the festivities to clear away the board. He is still a point of damage short and casts a Strength Testing Hammer, which auto-equips due to the hammer and is enough for the 6 commander damage needed to finish Air off and win Hidden the game. Game review. Man, well, this is definitely the first time I've seen a non-infinite commander damage win. Slicer is a house and surprisingly has such a big impact on the field even though it's all just a beat stick. It definitely makes a whole new subgame of just how to skirt Slicer around the table without it taking a player out. And to anyone out there who's sitting across the table, make sure to mulligan for an answer as this deck can deal a lot of damage. It also helped that Hidden had a turn 1 workshop, which really let him accelerate while also letting him cast an early Thorn and Static Orb. Air mentioned after the game that they had the win with a dramatic reversal, but they had to spend all their resources casting a chump blockers for Slicer. As for the other 2 players, it was unfortunate for Anthony, as he had the Bolt, but the Thorn stopped him from casting it till it was already converted and too large. With the table not having any more interaction till it was too late, Slicer very much took over.
Hey guys, I'm back. I want to thank the players and Amanda who both graciously checked my script for grammatical errors, but also selflessly gave up her Friday night to record this for me. And with that, I hope to see you guys later, and let me know what you thought about this channel getting a different narrator from time to time. Although don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Also, here are some of the bloopers that I laughed at when editing down the voiceover, so enjoy.
Man, well, this was definitely the first time I've seen a non-infinite commander damage win. Considering that I don't know the rules of Magic, this was definitely a first time for me. Maybe it is. And with that, I hope to see you guys later, and hopefully Steven will be back too. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. And music, man!
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I just wanted to let you know that we have a TCG affiliate link, and if you ever see a card you want to try or are inspired to brew something new, use our link when purchasing and we'll receive a small portion of the sale. This is a great way to support the channel, and if you enjoyed the gameplay, please leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps us keep making videos. And remember, never give up, even if you're dead on board. I'll see you guys later.